issue that we as elected officials deal with. How much do you, give up personally for the public good? It's a question.
Well, last night I asked Gayle about the two real estate monsters in the city, Excel and Pinnacle. And she mentioned she was in negotiation with them on certain development. Would you go into that?
Well, I know Extel has two buildings that you might have seen because it's 100th Street, a little bit above my district, and 99th Street. Extel purchased land there, and before the neighborhood woke up, really, and with some air rights from the local church. You always have to worry about air rights, where they're coming from, because under the current zoning, if you're a low building and you're not going to grow, you can sell your air rights to a building that wants to be nearby or to a developer who can then build taller. So people wonder, how did that building get so tall? And often it's because somebody else has given that developer air rights. So long and the short of it, 99th to 100th Street on Broadway, if you're ever over there, you'll see some really tall buildings. So they were built by Extel. To the credit of the community board and the mayor and the city planning commission, the rest of the area has now been downzoned, so it will never be as tall as those buildings. Extel also owns the Trump site. We also call it Riverside South. They're probably buying in your area. They're buying everywhere. 42nd Street, I read. So it's a big developer, and I'm working with them particularly in the Trump area. We haven't started negotiation, but you might know in the 60s and low 70s, there's a big parking lot. It's right near the river. If you go up the West Side Highway in a taxi or something.
On the west side.
Right. So
the parish of St. Paul the Apostle.
Right around there, yeah. One school focuses on theater, one school focuses on science, one school focuses on the media, one on law, one on technology. The reason I know that is because I help fund them in terms of science labs with your tax money, science labs and media labs, etc. There's still a good soccer team. Has always been. So I'm just saying that you have an issue, which you should fight for. I'm going to fight like you for the best possible schools. And my goal is to try to improve it. Right now, the school also still has the scanners. One of the biggest issues between LaGuardia and King right now is not so much the academic, because they're different. But I actually personally would not want to have, I want to get rid of the scanners.
Well, we can
I really believe if there's one place where funding is well managed, and could go a lot further. They need more full-time faculty, and not part-time. And they also need more support for the students coming in, because they're not necessarily college ready.
Gayle, just before we move on to other issues, I just wanted to clarify the term scanners, because a scanner could be used as a peripheral to computer systems. But I think what you were talking about is some type of X-ray equipment that the children are subjected to.
Scanners.
I'm sorry that I wasn't clear. It's just like when we go to City Hall, we always have to put our bags or go to the airport. It's those kinds. I guess you call them metal scanners. I don't know.
I think it's like X-ray equipment is what it really is.
Those are the ones. They are in some schools and not other schools.
And what is the crux of your arguments against the
Well, it's interesting. I think King used to have issues. It was still a good school. I mean, I'm a big believer. I support Brandeis. I support LaGuardia. I support Beacon. I have 9 high schools in my district. In this particular situation, LaGuardia does not have scanners or metal X-ray machines, and King does. Now, King, I believe that the students and the faculty, we may differ here, are really trying to improve the schools there. And I believe at this point, at least as a pilot, they could try not having the X-ray machines.
Absolutely.
Because I would like to see, I think you'd have a better feeling about going to school in the morning at this particular juncture for these particular 6 schools that are on the campus.
Because they're intrusive.
Right, and I think, and also you have to wait sometimes in line.
They make the kids late, and they can't get the kids to class.
But
so
it's controversial.
if you treat the children like criminals, it's almost like a self-fulfilling course of action.
Well, Joseph,
Julia Richmond, I was told this by my former husband, who was a New York City detective. He said that school at one time had the largest number of ammunition in it that they had seized, and they didn't have scanners. But now Julia Richmond has been cleaned up. So there's ways of doing
Exactly.
it. You don't need to use scanners. You just use, if a person is caught so seriously with a, and they even had Uzis. If they're caught with a weapon, that's it. They're out. Period. End of story. There's
Now,
no
wait a minute.
suspension. Okay, well, we're punishing you for a week. That's not a punishment. Anybody carrying a gun is not there to learn. They're there to harm others. So schools, I totally agree with you, can be turned around, can be upgraded, lifted, and have good children who want to learn, be productive, move on to society, and not be a threat to the other student. You know.
Right. I think
I certainly agree with you about the security measures in the school being intrusive, and I certainly don't want children being treated like criminals. But what would you say to parents who are alarmed? I mean, we've been exploring the issue of these antidepressant drugs, and we've been examining the trail of bodies connected to the use of these drugs on the last several consecutive programs that we've done. So what would you say to parents who are concerned about the rash of school shootings, I guess you could call it an epidemic of senseless and mindless acts of wanton violence that have occurred in schools all across the country?
Well, no, I think you could, and there are some schools, I want to be honest with you, in my district where the scanners or x-ray scanners or whatever, metal scanners should continue. I was just saying that this one school where there has been a lot of improvement, it's worth a pilot to see if we can not. There is discussion, though, between the principals. We have to worry about the teachers, parents. You know, they should have, the 6 schools should agree. I'm not going to make that decision. So
Yeah, and that's changed
anyway.
even without the mayor's help.
Right. But I know we were going to talk about co-ops. What happened to that topic?
Yes, we have about 2 minutes left,
Well,
so come on.
Well, yeah, well, you know, a lot of my friends are being harassed in co-ops. You know, in the 80s, they thought they were smart. They bought co-ops. In fact, Dina Loren is in that position too. And now they discover that they're just shareholders in a corporation and they own nothing. In fact, a few of them have even walked into banks and said, what about equity? They said, you get no equity because you don't own anything. You're in a co-op. And they're harassing the older tenants because in some buildings they're thinking of converting the co-ops into condominiums. And what's happening there, Gayle?
Well, you're right. I mean, there are so many different issues going. There's the issue of the co-ops, and sometimes they're well-run, and sometimes they're not. So we often get calls from co-op buildings where the shareholders who are not on the board are very upset. That's one co-op issue.
So you're saying that if you're on the board, you have better standing?
Well, I don't make generalizations. I want to be clear. Some buildings are very well run as co-ops, and I never hear from them. And there are some buildings where it's not so well run, and you hear from the shareholders who are not on the board. I mean, that's as an example. The other issue, as Josh alluded to, is not all co-ops buildings are all the units co-op.
Oh,
There's
really?
often
Some
tenants.
are rent-stabilized tenants that are in there.
Oh,
And
before.
they are being harassed as elderly. I mean, a lot of like HRA or adult services is being called in to remove these
I've
elderly.
always been harassed. Like if I upgraded my apartment, I remember one apartment I moved to, and it had a backyard, and it was just a slab of cement. So I had people come in and put beautiful plants all over and gravel on the floor and furnished it. And the landlord came in and he said, "Oh my God, you made my property so beautiful." And from that moment on, he was trying to get me out of the apartment. He was just, but I wouldn't budge,
Well, on the co-op front, the other thing, the newest other problem too, Josh, is if a building goes from rental, it usually goes to condo now, like you said. But the issue there is in the interim between the last 10 years since when Stanley Michaels was in the city council, there is a new law that says if you make more than $175,000 for 2 years, and if your rent is more than $2,000 a month, then your rent is going to go from stabilized to market.
Right.
So that means that when the condo plan comes around, this is another huge problem. You can't buy because the owner of the building or the sponsor says you're out. So they figure that they can get a higher rent even than what you're paying, but more importantly, they want a vacant unit.
Well, what's more is they can bring it up to market rate, which would force that particular tenant out.
Right.
So they would have to hold on until they've actually purchased.
Right.
All right. So anyway, it was wonderful having you as our
Nice
guest.
to be here.